4,388 days of no justice for George Smith. 12 years almost to the day, in fact. This is Forensic Talk on Jim Campbell. Maureen Smith is George Allen Smith IV's mother. She was born and raised in Hertfordshire, England. Her husband, George Allen Smith III, is from a long-standing Greenwich family. George Allen Smith I was a major league pitcher and a math teacher. George Allen Smith II was a dentist and a horse breeder. And George Allen Smith III, well-known, George's father owns Coscob Liquor. Maureen's become an outspoken advocate for her son and other cruise crime victims as co-founders of the International Cruise Victims Association. And we're joined also in studio with Bree Smith, George Smith IV's sister. And she graduated from Columbia Law School as a Harlan Fiske Stone Scholar, worked as a corporate attorney, and since the disappearance of her brother on Royal Caribbean's Brilliance of the Sea ship, July 5, 2005, while on his honeymoon cruise, Bree's devoted her life to getting justice for her brother and other crime victims of cruises. And in February of 2014, she created a site on Facebook aptly named Justice for George Smith. Welcome back.
Thank you for having us, Jim.
Good to see you both, and thanks for coming in today. And it makes it more personal for all of us because it's a long-time Greenwich family. And I asked Maureen this last time we spoke a couple years ago, so I'm going to ask it again. Has it gotten any better day by day? As you get further away, are you able to let go a bit, or is it still just burning in you every day?
It never goes away. It burns you. It eats you up, especially as we haven't had any justice. And we're continually fighting day after day to get justice for my son. And it just never goes away. We're not going to let it go away, not until we get answers for George.
Bree, from your perspective, what's it like to live without closure?
I think it's the worst kind of cruelty there is. Because George was victimized on that night, July 5th, 2005. He's been since victimized continuously by the cruise line, and our families have been victimized not only by Royal Caribbean, but by a Justice Department that has not gotten justice for my brother.
Are you still a corporate attorney?
No, I'm not.
So you're focused on George as your main mission in life?
Yeah, I blog basically on Facebook to show the truth about what happened to him. It's often obscured in the media, and I make sure that the truth is going to come out about what happened to him.
There's a lot of information you put up there, too.
Yes.
To both of you, is it in your gut? What gives you the sense that it was foul play? Can you almost sense it or feel it, or aside from the evidence and stuff?
The actions of certain people. Jennifer Hagel, who's now Jennifer Agnew, her actions from when she first ran from Turkey home to Cromwell, Connecticut, highly, highly suspicious. And ever since then, it's still suspicious to us, isn't it?
Very.
Yeah, very suspicious.
Did you guys? Were you close to her before and during the wedding?
Yes, we were.
Yeah.
And thought she was a good person fundamentally?
Yes.
My son certainly did as well. He idolized her.
And after the wedding, actually, and after the honeymoon where my brother disappeared, she would come and spend the night at my parents' house. And, it was very strange. She wouldn't drink, and she used to have a lot to drink. She would not drink when she was with us, and she wasn't on any medication. She said she couldn't remember anything. She also said that she did not want to be deposed either in a civil or criminal case. And she was also looking for a quick settlement with the cruise line, which we couldn't understand at the time. It's very suspicious.
And now, when did you stop having communications with her?
It was the fall of 2005, so George went missing in July 2005.
So it was just a few more months.
Yes. It got too suspicious, and although I think I didn't handle that properly at the time. I wish I had stayed in with her to ask her more questions. But basically, she said that we were both going to be co-administrators of my brother's estate so we could fight for him together, and she cut me out. And she made herself, the sole administrator, and then quickly settled with Royal Caribbean, which blocked my parents' discovery efforts against the cruise line. And
was that on the advice of counsel on her side that she did that?
Well, you'd have to ask her, but I think she was led.
I think she was led from the very beginning, from the time that she ran from the cruise ship in Turkey. She went into a hotel. She spent the whole night on the telephone in Turkey. She never called us once. She spent the whole night with her family. She jumped on a plane, came to New York. Her whole family met her, and to drive to their home in Cromwell, they drove right by our house without stopping. So they had many secrets.
How did you find out?
About George?
Yeah.
Mom can actually say she received
We received a phone call from John Haeger, Jennifer's father, early hours of the morning, crying. And we wouldn't believe it because we thought he was still around somewhere or missing, but obviously he knew differently.
What did he say had happened? Because at that point, no one would have known, right?
No, he said that there's. What did he say now? He said
something terrible.
Has happened to George, but he didn't go into any detail. And of course, we went into denial right away, and they never told us anything, nothing at all.
I had lunch recently with Mrs. Moxley. Obviously, you're aware of that murder.
Yes.
And she told me one of the first things she said was, I just had my 85th birthday, and I'm now in my 43rd year of trying to get justice for Martha. It's over half my life. Is that what it feels like for a mother? Yes,
it does. Every single day. But we're going to continue fighting. We're strong as a family, and it's a very hard job trying to fight the cruise lines because they are very powerful, very, very wealthy. You can buy silence with people, you can enrich people's lives, you can do anything you want when you've got a lot of money.
But we have Facebook as a tool, and transparency as to what happened to us and as to the true facts of what happened to George, and they can't silence us. So this isn't going to take 40 years. We just need a Justice Department that's going to work with us, and we have the utmost faith in the new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions.
And from your perspective as a sister, I've interviewed several times Kim Goldman. She's Ron Goldman's sister and you wouldn't believe, after whatever it's been now, she is still absolutely burning about the whole thing. Now, Tanya Brown, who is Nicole's younger sister, her philosophy has been, I'm going to forgive O.J., not because I don't think he's anything but a scumbag, but I don't want it to eat me for the rest of my life. So it's kind of two different approaches.
It is. We haven't had a trial. We haven't had any arrests. We haven't had any trial. I'm not going to stop in disclosing the truth and fighting for the Justice Department to do something.
Why do you think Jeff Sessions is going to be any different?
I just have a feeling about him.
Do you?
And I'm in the process of writing a letter to the acting director of the FBI now, Andrew McCabe, attempting to reopen the FBI investigation, and I'm hopeful about that.
But we'll talk in more detail about the FBI investigation, but people will be interested to know the FBI director who closed this investigation was James Comey.
That's right, and it was closed twice during his time as director of the FBI.
Okay, I think just to be fair to folks, because we've sort of jumped in, I don't know if one of you briefly describe what happened.
Well, that's a good question. We actually settled with the cruise lines only in order to get information from the cruise line, and we were provided with thousands of pages of documents, but no smoking gun within them. So it depends. Are you going to listen to what the cruise lines say happened to George, or what ear witnesses and eyewitnesses saw that night? It's a long story, but basically George and Jennifer had been gambling in the casino that night, and there were reports that he may have won up to $15,000 in the casino that night.
Does anybody know where the money is, by the way, if that was true?
That's a very good question, Jim, because when we were provided by the documentation from Royal Caribbean, they specifically refused to give us an inventory of what was in George's safe, and his wallet was empty.
And wouldn't you think also that the casino has records as to who was winning and losing money?
They have precise records, and they have the best security camera footage in the entire cruise ship in that casino because they're concerned about theft by casino workers.
Right.
But, of course, when we got the videotapes, Jim, there were multiple dates. They were difficult to see. Those videotapes were pretty much worthless to us.
Did they have any comments on the accounting part of it? Yeah, George won this amount of money on this. No.
Royal Caribbean did not provide us with any documentation that George
Did they say he did not make any?
No, they made neither of those statements.
Really?
But they specifically should have, pursuant to the disclosure obligations within the settlement agreement, told us one way or the other, and they did not do that.
All right, let's talk about sort of what happened, because it's kind of ugly, but there was a lot of drinking going on in the casino. This absinthe, which I hadn't heard about, but is very strong, as we try to figure out what happened to Jennifer. But there was George and Jennifer had some altercation.
Well, it's not actually been proven that they were drinking absinthe that night, so I'm not going to discuss that.
Okay.
but a lot of people were having a few drinks that night, and they didn't end up murdered on an overhang on a cruise ship. But basically what happened was Jennifer was apparently flirting with a casino manager from South Africa on her honeymoon called Lloyd Botha, who was the casino manager in training. And George confronted her about it, according to numerous witnesses, and called her hussy. Jennifer then put her foot up, kicked George in the private area. He keeled over from the pain of it. She stormed out of the lounge and walked off with Lloyd Botha, the Royal Caribbean casino manager.
And then somehow is found unconscious.
Well, that's the cruise line story and Jennifer's story, that she was found on the opposite side of the ship. However, numerous ear witness and eyewitness reports put her around the cabin at the time that George was thrown overboard. They heard a woman's voice in the hallway. They also heard a woman's voice and a woman's scream within their cabin at the time George was thrown to his death.
So you don't think she was found passed out?
I think that's her story.
Even weren't there cruise personnel that escorted her and all this kind of stuff?
Well, that's according to the Royal Caribbean documentation, but of course they're paid by the cruise line.
Okay, so do we lead that there's any potential involvement in Jennifer Agne's involvement in his death?
Well, that's up to the FBI to determine, and we're hopeful that Acting Director Andrew McCabe will reopen it because her behavior is beyond suspicious, quite frankly.
Why would you actually come home from a cruise ship without your husband and after 2 weeks cancel his every insurance he had, his gym membership, his car insurance? She cancelled his phone.
You mean in theory she should have stayed over there thinking
Yes.
he was maybe a man overboard and might
Like
be...
we thought, Jim.
And
we
she
thought he
cancelled
was
his...
overboard. My parents flew there to search for him. They went to the island Samos in Greece where he would have ended up. They gave out flyers at all the hospitals and police stations in Greece. Meanwhile, she was the suspect in Turkey. She was eventually released by the Turkish administrator and got on the first plane out of there.
And you know, that part, it's pretty ugly, but it doesn't surprise me as much because I've been involved in the Amanda Knox case.
Yes.
And she should have gotten, out of that country because she was innocent.
Yes.
And it made no sense.
That's right.
You think that it was premature that she sort of gave up on him, right?
What did she know, Jim? What did she know?
What did she know? When did she know? Because there
left?
was that blood stain on the life raft deck.
Yes.
And there was the big thud that was heard from the road.
After the big thud, a woman's scream was heard.
Okay.
So who was in the room that would hear a scream? And that's very concerning to us. And, of course, one of the witnesses that came out that discussed the scream, all of a sudden she was quickly silenced. And why is that?
Okay. So we should put it in perspective for folks. There were 4 men, right, who I think were alleged to have escorted George back to his room because he was having trouble because of the alcohol. And that's the story, right? Is that
Well, that's
target?
Royal Caribbean's story. That
Okay.
is not our story. According to attorney accounts, there were 3 crew members in the room both before and after George was thrown overboard.
3 crew members.
Yes.
So you don't think the Russians may even have been there?
No, I think that the Russians knew George, but I'm not convinced that they were the ones that murdered him. From all the accounts, it sounded like the casino staff knew George had a lot of money in the room, that they were in Jennifer's company that evening. And it's not clear to us that the Russians did anything other than escort George back to his room.
All right, let me pursue that a little bit because I think the last time that we spoke, the assumption was that you thought maybe these Russian kids were involved in it.
No, actually, I never assumed that, Jim. That's the story that Royal Caribbean has put out. In fact, both of this person that was in Jennifer's company the night of his murder, he was given an FBI polygraph. He was also given a criminal attorney. Well, according to his Miami attorney, Andrew Rear, who was paid by Royal Caribbean to represent him, they said he passed. Of course, the FBI would never say whether he passed.
Let me ask you this. What motive would the ship have to murder him or to cover it up?
I think it was a robbery. I honest to God think he won that money and they went in to collect that money. That is my opinion.
Okay.
That he went into the casino stuff.
Well,
we don't know for sure. It's my opinion. but possibly they went into, it was a robbery, botched robbery, and poor George fought back because he wouldn't allow that to happen. And he lost his life because of it. And Jennifer, Royal Caribbean, the lawyers, a lot of them, they all say there was no blood. We have had hands-on witnesses from our reward posters telling us, crew members almost crying on the phone, telling us how much blood there was
in the room.
In the
because
room and the corridor.
We've seen the picture on the where he fell.
In the room.
In the room, his sheets.
Well, that's interesting because...
Have you seen pictures, by the way?
Two lines, two perfectly drawn straight lines.
We have crime scene photos that were taken by Royal Caribbean. Interestingly, two sets. The first set was before the Turkish investigators went in, so they admitted by their own account in a letter to us that they traipsed through the crime scene, approximately 5 of them taking photos even before the Turks got in there for their crime scene investigation. Then we have photos from after the Turkish crime scene investigation, and they don't make sense at all. Because Royal Caribbean said that the Turkish crime scene investigators took all the bedding, all the relevant forensic evidence, but the photos we have from Royal Caribbean, the bedding is still on the bed. So that those two things conflict completely.
So the cruise line's motivation to cover it up is simply because they don't want the bad press and everything, right?
Bad publicity.
They don't have any reason to have murdered George. One of their employees is what you're saying may have...
Well, I don't think that the chairman of Royal Caribbean murdered George, but I know that he doesn't want his stock price to decline.
Yeah.
When we were out there talking in the media about the fact that Royal Caribbean covered up George's murder, their stock price tanked, and they don't want that bad publicity. They want everything to think it's rosy on Royal Caribbean cruise ships, and you should go on.
So even to this day, unless they destroyed evidence, there should be evidence how much money George won in the casino somewhere in their records.
There should be, but we did not receive that, and we specifically asked that.
But have they denied it exists?
They won't give us any indication of whether he won or not.
Because that's something that once that's determined, well, then where's the money?
Right.
And then you suddenly, it's always follow the money.
Well, they will not give us the contents of the safe.
Right.
We want the contents of the safe. We've asked on numerous occasions through lawyers and everything, and they will not give it to us.
Okay, let me ask you this. In Brian Burroughs' article in Vanity Fair, he talks about this. George liked to have a cigar. He'd had a lot to drink. He got out on the railing. There was a butt print, which I have never heard of before, on the railing, and it may have gone down that way, pure accident.
Well, that's interesting. Brian Burrow actually worked hands in hands with Lanny Davis, Royal Caribbean's attorney, criminal
Bill Clinton's
defense
attorney.
Yes, him as well. But basically, they worked hand in hand, and Brian Burrow spoke to us for 10 minutes, basic background, nothing. So basically, that entire article reflects Royal Caribbean's perspective on what happened to George. And the fact that they're saying that George was smoking a cigar and fell backwards does not account for the fact that the Turkish press, all the witnesses on the boat that have spoken to investigators, said that that room was covered in blood and that there was blood in the hallway outside of George's cabin. If George got a bloody nose and fell backwards smoking a cigar, how do you account for the blood in the room and in the hallway?
Did he smoke cigars?
Yeah. He did, but it's irrelevant, quite frankly.
Brian Burroughs had many, many meetings with Lanny Davis. Lanny Davis has written a book called Crisis Tales, and in it he says how many meetings he had with Brian Burroughs.
Let me ask you this. If it had been an accident, and I got to be quick, if it was an accident, if he was smoking the cigar and had too much to drink, and that was settled, would you feel better that there'd be closure?
It wasn't an accident, so I can't even answer that question.
Yeah.
All the ear-witness accounts of the fighting in the room, of the blood all over the place, that does not account for an accident. So it's sort of a moot point.
So you wouldn't get peace either way. You're listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. We'll talk about more about the cover-up when we get back. Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, announcing a new crime show on Mondays at 6 p.m. on 1490 WGCH. All talk and all crime. The nation's biggest murderers were the go-to source for the Moxley murder and the Skakel appeals. Financial crimes on Wall Street. Inside the crimes of Russia's Putin and more. The facts, the forensics, the inside stories. From the host of Business Talk with Jim Campbell, it's Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. All talk and all crime. Mondays at 6 p.m. right after the Lisa Wexler Show on 1490 WGCH and WGCH.com anywhere. We're talking with George Smith, the forced mother and sister, Maureen and Bree Smith. George Smith disappeared on his honeymoon cruise in 2005. It's a death that remains unsolved to this day. We're into the cover-up now. And this is pretty sophisticated when you think about it, because the Russian, the four guys had been in trouble on the boat. They seem like sort of bad actors. They're a great front to who you would think would be the most logical candidates. They were supposedly in his cabin. And then there was the big thud, and guys left, and that we never heard
Well,
from.
Jim, who said that the Russians were actually in trouble on the cruise ship? Was it the cruise ship themselves? Royal Caribbean has an incentive to point to other people instead of...
But there's some pretty ugly stuff. It was claimed that they actually raped some young girl the night before.
Well, with respect to that, there was actually an entire videotape of the sexual encounter. Mm-hmm. The Italian police saw the entire videotape. After the videotape, they were released because she actually said that she basically consented on the tape. So the fact that they're claiming there was a sexual assault and Royal Caribbean kicked them off the boat several days after George disappeared is very strange.
Okay, so we're talking pretty sophisticated on the part of Royal Caribbean and almost instantaneously.
Yes, well, they've been doing this for 30 plus years, Jim. This is their standard procedure. If you try to find a murder or a missing person that there's actually have been arrests, you will not find it because they've been doing these cover-ups for so many years.
Senator Blumenthal calls it the Wild, Wild West.
Yes.
That there's literally complete lawlessness.
Right, lawlessness. And even when they get cruise laws on the books, like Senator Blumenthal has been involved in, they need to be enforced, and they're not, and this is the problem. They don't call the FBI. The FBI has said that they will not. The FBI in George's case will not issue a letter saying Royal Caribbean cooperated with them. They specifically asked, and the FBI will not provide a letter saying Royal Caribbean cooperated. And why is that? Because they did not.
Okay, how does Jennifer Hagel fit into this? It's not like she'd be in conspiracy to rob money that George won that was hers too.
Well, it was very interesting that she was in the company and flirting with the casino manager who apparently knew that George had many thousands of dollars in his cabin.
Door entry kinds of information, because that's recorded.
Yes.
Did Jennifer's card go off in that time frame?
Well, that's actually very interesting. I was just looking at that earlier today. According to witness accounts, Jennifer left the disco with the casino manager, Lloyd, at 3:25. According to the door entries, George's key was used at 3:52 and 4:01. This is very strange. Why would George's key be used 9 minutes apart? Mm-hmm. And her key was allegedly never used at all. Mm-hmm. They claim that the Russians took a very drunk George all the way to the solarium to look for Jennifer, who allegedly wasn't in the cabin, and this long trip to another deck with the person that couldn't walk took only 9 minutes. This is very suspect. Uh-huh. Additionally, at 4:48 and 4:57, there were two entries on the door, and it was crossed off on the key entries. The person there, Josephine Sarmiento, that allegedly opened the door, was not on any crew list provided by Royal Caribbean.
Who is she?
Exactly. Who is she, Jim? We don't know. She was not in any of the documentation.
Now, those two entries are between when George was in the room, right?
No, those two entries are after George was thrown overboard. Could she have been housekeeping, cleaning the room? We don't know. But she is not in the crew records. As
an employee, even?
No, she's not at all. The only place she's found, and her name is crossed off, is on the key entry.
All right, on Jennifer again, what would her involvement be in speculating that if she was not passed out and she was actually in the room before or after, or?
Well, when my parents were trying to remove her as the administrator, one of the points was that her behavior was so embarrassing that evening that she wanted this whole thing to go away.
That I can see.
So that it would not surface what she was actually doing that night and what she actually saw.
Is it true, because I think I read this on your Facebook site, that her lawyer requested any video surveillance tape of her having sex with another person?
Yes, her lawyer sent a letter to Royal Caribbean saying, are there any videotapes of Jennifer having sex with men other than her husband on the night of his death?
Wow. Any answer to that? Did they say that?
I didn't see an answer.
They said no, didn't they?
I didn't know. I didn't see an answer.
So do you have a gut as to what her role was in this thing?
Well, I think she was kept busy. Perhaps when things... I really don't know.
I think she knows exactly what happened to my son. Exactly what happened.
And she was able to live with herself?
Yeah.
Knowing about it?
Yeah.
Because why not turn them in?
Well, because her embarrassing behavior from that night would come out. And if there is a videotape, like her lawyer was worried about, of her having sex with men, not man, but men, other than George, on the night he was murdered, can you imagine how that would look?
On her honeymoon.
Now, I was wondering, because this behavior seems so out of the ordinary, and I don't know her, whether she was drugged.
Well, her hair was taken by the FBI, and we don't believe she was because, according to Royal Caribbean's own crew members, she was, when she was found on the opposite side of the boat, she was coherent. We believe George may have been drugged. And that's why some of the people we're interested in talking to are the bartenders that served George on the night of his death.
Do you have any explanation for why she had a massage appointment the next morning and never inquired where George was and didn't even seem to be that concerned about it in the massage place, right?
Well, that's interesting, Jim, because she's, according to Royal Caribbean, she was returned to the room at 4:57. According to Royal Caribbean's documents, she was at the spa at 8:30 the next morning. Okay. She was in the same dress from the night before. She hadn't, according to her own account, showered or even brushed her teeth. And she went for a couples massage an hour and a half early without George, yet she did not inquire where he was. Was this a place to keep her out of the room before the Turkish CSI got in there, or did she really have a scheduled massage with George? That's the question.
What's your thinking about this?
It's just mind-blowing. I mean, to go to the lengths. There's a cover-up like you wouldn't believe in my son's murder. And the more we delve into it, the more we see, right? It's just, it's mind-blowing. In my lifetime, I wouldn't have believed that people could do the sort of thing they've done to our family.
What are some of the things, without revealing names, etc., that have come in through your reward and stuff that were not in the sort of the record before the case was shut down?
Well, we have had...
Is there new evidence or something?
There is, yeah. But actually it was given to the FBI and we're not supposed to discuss it. But one interesting thing is what my mother was discussing before, the Bravo Bravo fire in the incinerator. So George was returned... Jennifer was allegedly returned to the room at 4:57.
Okay.
At 5:10. So shortly after security entered the room with Jennifer, there's a fire in the incinerator room. What was burned in that room that night?
Now, my question to that is almost instantaneous cover-up.
Exactly, they do it so much
because it's so ingrained. Because I would say, like, who's that organized to?
Have you ever heard of crimes on cruise ships been prosecuted?
No, it's like murders in Greenwich. I hate to say, never solved.
Recently, I sat down with in Mike Jones's office with a witness.
Say he's a lawyer from I.B. Barnum.
With a witness who called from another country, and he said that there was so much blood in the cabin, and that we had to speak to the housekeepers about it. Because there was so much blood.
And this is interesting. After George's cruise, they cleaned out the entire cabin steward staff. And when we tried to find out who the laundry people were, they had no records of who the laundry people were because they claimed they were independent contractors and didn't keep the records.
So you think that the beating was in the room? And then he was pushed overboard.
Well, the neighbors next door, who were called the lawyers, heard fighting going on there. And they said to the security guards, you need to get in there. There's a fight in there. And they did not. They did not go in there.
Why do you think? So it doesn't... It looks like murder again if you hear this big thud and you make no effort to go see if he's alive or anything, or to go see if you can help him, right?
Well, that's actually very concerning.
Would he have rolled off the boat?
We don't believe he would, Jim, because we were told by the Greek Coast Guard that the waters were still that night. Additionally, it was a very long, wide...
So he would have just
he would have stayed there, and he was alive. We know he was alive on the overhang because this is very difficult to say, but there are finger marks showing that he was holding on to the end. And there was also a bloody footprint on the overhang. And this is interesting because the only people that could access that ladder to get to that overhang were security. And we don't know if perhaps he was thrown over a second time because he would have lay there otherwise.
What is this about? Jennifer said several times that he was on prescription pills and alcohol maybe didn't mix well, and that might have been a cause.
We actually don't believe that's true, and I have the documentation that she provided.
Do we know what prescription?
Well, it's irrelevant because just to tell you, Jim, one of the dates that she said that he was at the doctor, we know for a fact that he could not have left the store, so we don't believe that to be true.
So Jennifer is either in on the cover-up or so embarrassed about her behavior she's willing to watch her husband sit by while her husband's murdered, basically, and not help to try and solve it.
Well,
because she's embarrassed.
All I know is she quickly settled my parents' interests without even telling them she was negotiating. And then, gave us a terrible hard time after that.
She was a witness. I believe she was a witness. She knows exactly what happened.
You think she was actually a witness to the murder?
Yes, I do.
Well, there's, like I said, the woman's voice heard in the room and the scream after the thud. So who was the woman that screamed after George was thrown overboard?
Her actions are not normal. Her actions, what she did afterwards, they're just not normal, are they?
No.
Why do you think they're definitely not normal? Why do you think the Russians are innocent? Why do you feel so...
I think they were rowdy. I think they were, maybe they were rough. Maybe they cursed. Maybe they did this. But that's not murder. That's not murder.
If it was found out that he won no money that night, okay, would it change your feeling about the story?
No, because George, because Jennifer was still flirting with Lloyd, the casino manager, that night.
So it might have been involved. Well, there she'd really have an incentive not to, almost more than the thing, because she looks like almost a cause of it then.
Well,
right?
Either way, it's clear it was not an accident, but Royal Caribbean quickly got out into the media saying it was an accidental death. They told the people on the ship that it was an accidental death. When that cruise ship left Kusadasi at 7 o'clock that night, those murderers were still on board, and those cruise passengers did not know that because they told him he fell overboard. Imagine being those passengers on that Royal Caribbean ship. Murderers were on board, and they left them there.
And so Jennifer is questioned by the Turkish police and is considered a suspect. So
yes.
She wants to get herself home.
She was the suspect in Turkey, yes.
She was the suspect, so she obviously wants to hightail it out of there
yes.
as fast as possible.
Right.
Did she ever come back to the boat? Or?
No. She was outside the boat, and the customer service representative packed up her and George's belongings, and she took them with her on the first plane out of there.
What time did John Hagel call you?
It was about 6 o'clock in the morning.
Here?
Which is, yeah.
And what time would it have been over there?
About 7 hours difference. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. About 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock over there. There's 7 hours difference. They're ahead.
1 in the afternoon?
Yes.
What was the story at that time?
We didn't know, did we?
Well, I'm trying to draw how John Hagel was convinced that George was dead.
Because that's exactly it.
That's
Why was
exactly
he crying?
It, Jim,
Why was he
we
crying?
weren't convinced. We were not told about the blood from Royal Caribbean.
No.
All they told us was no news. They did not tell us there was a murder investigation. They did not.
You called Royal Caribbean right away?
No, what happened was Royal Caribbean called us.
Oh, they did?
Several times. And all they said was no news. And at this point, we had known from Congressman Chris Shea's office that there was blood in the room. And I specifically asked them about the blood in the room. And they said, we have no news, we have no information. And then I got the Turkish police statements, which I was very reluctant and didn't release until recently. And they indicate that it was a crime, that she was a suspect, yet Royal Caribbean told us no news. I also had the statement from the casino manager, Lloyd Botha, and also a statement from one of those men, not the Russian man, the other one, Josh Askin, talking about the fact that the casino staff knew that George had money in the room. And there's Royal Caribbean telling me they have no news. It was clear from the beginning there was a major cover-up here.
So the Hagels knew it was a death before Royal Caribbean was willing to admit that to you.
Jennifer was on the Joe Scarborough show very soon after, and she said when George's belongings were thrown on the gangplank with hers, she's seen George's sneakers, and she said, I couldn't believe it, she said, because I knew that he would never wear those again. So what does that tell you?
How did she know?
At the same time, Royal Caribbean is saying that there's no news, on his disappearance.
Right. She knew.
No news.
So either they were covering up right away, or she knew what happened.
Well, she said George would never wear those sneakers again.
How did she know he was dead? We assumed he was alive. That's why my parents went over there searching for him. They thought he had
but what I'm saying is Royal Caribbean may have known he was dead.
Oh, of course they did. Yes.
Well, they knew about the blood on the overhang, but they did not tell us about it. And also, we learned from Congressman Chris Shays, former Congressman Chris Shays, there was blood in the room. They did not tell us about that either. They never told us there was any sort of Turkish police investigation. They just said no news.
How quickly did they clean the room?
Well, that's a good question, Jim. We have some concerns about where Jennifer really was that night. If she was in the room, they wouldn't be cleaning. If she was hiding out someplace else, perhaps they were cleaning. We don't know, but this is something that the FBI needs to find out.
What is there any, have there been any reports of how soon they cleaned it up?
Well, this is interesting because...
and that's the room. We know when they cleaned the deck, right, I assume.
Well, actually,
you could see that.
Well, even before you think, Jim, I've actually discussed it on Facebook, and it hasn't been discussed in the press since right after George went missing. But they were hosing down the blood on the overhang very early in the morning, hours before the Turkish crime scene investigators got
See, that would
board.
never happen, would never be allowed in a crime scene in the U.S.
No, it wouldn't. So if they did that to the blood on the overhang, what did they do to the blood in the room?
We also had a witness come forward from Kusadasi, Turkey, saying that the head housekeeper had told her how much blood there was in the cabin.
And this head housekeeper, we don't know where that person is to this day.
We do know her. Yeah.
They cleaned them out, though. They cleaned them out after they all got
she's
new
no longer
contracts.
working for. Her name is. I better not give her name.
You're listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, flagship station WGCH Greenwich. We'll talk about some reforms needed for cruise safety. Coming up.
We could go for a...
I'm going to ask the... And we're back on the Honeymoon cruise disappearance, looking like foul play from the beginning. And you've offered a $100,000 reward, and in return you promised confidentiality. We'll let towards the end of the show, Bree, give the information of where you do that. But
That's
you were
right.
talking, Maureen, during the break that somebody from Istanbul that was friends of George investigated.
At Babson College, where my son went to college, Kemal, he was very, very helpful to us. His father was an ambassador in Istanbul, and he sent the guards down that his father, they trained with the same guards that were in Kusadasi that went onto the cruise ship. And he said that they told him that there was blood in the corridor.
Blood in the corridor as well, which is outside the room.
Yes.
So we now may have blood on the outside, in the inside more than was reported, because there's pictures of blood specks on a sheet, right?
Yes,
Perfect
but
lines.
that conflicts with the witness reports that say that there was so much blood in the room that they would never go in there again. If there was so much blood in the room, then why would there be two perfectly placed tiny stripes on one sheet? That does not make sense.
So basically, we think it was a botched robbery, and because of that, they brutally murdered him, it sounds like, with blood all over the place, and then basically left him on the deck.
I think a lot of people may get thrown over on cruise ships because there's so much crime on cruise ships that gets covered up. And it's mind-blowing that it's been allowed to get along in this country, this civilized country that Americans pay to go on a cruise ship with their American dollars, that those folks in Washington allow this to continue.
Well, let's talk about those folks in Washington. The Cruise Passenger Protection Act has been proposed twice. You can talk briefly about what it does. But tell us why it isn't getting put in place. Is it lobbying of the cruise ships?
Well, it's partially lobbying, but quite frankly, even if this was in place, the Cruise Passenger Protection Act, will it be enforced? Because here we have, George's murder investigation closed twice under former director Jim Comey in 2015 and 2016 with all the evidence, the amount of evidence we alone know about, and the FBI has so much more. And they were even getting more witnesses to come in based on our reward poster, yet they closed down the investigation.
Why did they say they had to close it, or that they had
They said they did not have enough evidence, but we alone have a tremendous amount of evidence.
Well,
and
first of all, the blood evidence is inconsistent with what is been considered to be in the case. So
that, and the fact that our reward, which we first started offering in 2014, was bringing in new witnesses. How do you close a murder investigation when new witnesses are coming forward? I'd like to ask former Director Comey that question.
What are you doing with folks that come in through there?
Well, there's a hotline, 1-844-651-1936. And also there's an email, georgesmithtipline@gmail.com. And if you call or email, it will be returned. And this is a $100,000 reward.
Are there folks that are asking for that money?
Oh, yes. We've had calls, and that's what doesn't make sense, Jim. We've had calls. We've had new witnesses come forward. We've given it to the FBI, and the FBI shuts the case.
Do you feel there's a smoking gun in amongst there?
Well, we weren't party to all the information that was given directly to the FBI.
Some of that came in through there went directly?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
And the $100,000 is put up by your family?
Yes.
Exclusively?
Yes.
And you have to, do you have to put that in reserve somewhere? Or?
Well, see, it's dependent on arrests and convictions. And unfortunately, the FBI has closed it. But as I said earlier, we're hopeful that under President Trump and the new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, that it will be reopened. And we hope to give out this money if people do lead us to arrests and convictions. I think it's a matter of time, Jim, I have to be honest.
How do you, what strategy are you using to get Attorney General Sessions to relook at it?
Well, I'm actually in the process of writing a letter to Acting Director Andrew McCabe, sort of detailing the background of, the amount of information we have and the fact that it was closed twice under his predecessor, and requesting him to reopen it, and we're hopeful.
Maureen, you're writing a book?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Did you ever get a title yet, or?
The Ship of Horrors, because that's what they call the Brilliance of the Sea in Naples, Italy, when it pulled into dock.
Really?
The Ship of Horrors.
And do you intend to have a theory of what happened in the book, or just focus on
I have all the evidence I'm pulling out of the 10,000 pages of the settlement files. It's very arduous to do, isn't it? It's really hard because they've got so many pages of bottles of vodka and excursions, and then in between you'll find a little bit hidden. But we've dug deep. It's a job.
Have you read all 10,000 pages?
Yes,
almost all of them.
Yeah,
we've
several
read them,
times.
yeah. Big,
and
heavy
every
books.
time you read it, you find new information.
And I bet you they gave it in a way that it's not late. You have to go in and...
Oh, my God.
You have to work. I think they thought when they gave us that many thousands of pages, and Jennifer...
I do know something that Royal Caribbean, when they settle with a family, they will definitely put a silence clause in there, because that was our clause, wasn't it? That we would not be silenced, and I don't think they will ever allow.
Yeah, there's clearly a non-disclosure in hers, and by the way, she got a lot more money than you folks, right?
Well, we don't know the extent.
No,
we know what it says in the settlement agreement. We don't know if that was the full amount or not.
You think there was undisclosed payments, you mean?
I'm not sure, but that's something I hope the FBI will look into.
Now, originally she had emails to you folks saying, we're going to fight this together.
Right.
And then her whole story switched.
Oh,
well, she said that we cannot let them get away with murder.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very strange thing to say, because shortly thereafter, she said it was an accident and George's fault. Well, what is it? Is it murder or is it an accident? It doesn't
When did you
make
think
sense.
it was murder?
I knew right away, because I got the Turkish police statements from the American embassy.
That
and
we
I
shouldn't
knew
have
right
got.
away.
We shouldn't have got those. They were funneled to us by a girl called Laura in the Ankara.
Yeah.
And she wasn't supposed to send them to us.
I was going to say, she's in the U.S. consulate
yes,
there?
but she wasn't supposed to send them. She was new on the job.
And what did why was murder was brought up in those?
Well, Jennifer was the suspect. You're not a suspect in an accident, and that says it all.
And she was read her Miranda rights in Turkey, wasn't she?
And she was given a lawyer.
Now, you've read the stuff that they sent you by mistake.
Yes.
Why was she listed as a suspect? Just because she...
That's up to Royal Caribbean.
Yeah, that's up to the Turkish police.
Yeah.
You'd have to ask them.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Bree, give everybody the name of your Facebook site.
Sure. It's facebook.com/Justice for George Smith.
Facebook.com//Justice for George Smith. And there is a fascinating amount of information. Almost every day you're posting stuff up there, right?
Yes, I am.
And as we've said all along, we're staying with the story until the family gets closure. And I hope you're right that it's not going to be what Mrs. Moxley
it won't be. I'll promise you that, Jim.
And I tell you, it's a great memory to your son that you guys have basically devoted your life to this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks to... Go ahead, Annie.
How do you have your son massacred on a cruise ship, left with a bloodstain on an overhang, and not pursue what happened to him? You just can't. I won't let it go.
How is your Mr. Smith dealing with this?
He's fine. He works along with us, doesn't he? We're a united team, and we all have each other. So I think if we were on our own, it would be a lot more difficult. And luckily, financially, we were able to do it, and there's a lot of people that financially can't do it, and they're just thrown to the wayside.
Great tribute to George. Thanks to Maureen Smith, to Bree Smith. This has been Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. See everybody next Monday.